You're tuned into The Collective Voice, thought-provoking interviews co-hosted by young adults, fostering deep faith through courageous questions. Welcome to the conversation. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the 787 Collective Podcast, The Collective Voice. I am Reverend Phil Dieke, the Director of Congregational Innovation at Austin Seminary, and I'm joined today by Sarah Iverson, another person from the book that we have been talking about with the Riverside Innovation Hub up in Minneapolis. The book is Hungry for Hope, and Sarah is going to join us today to talk about the chapter that she co-wrote. And what a great chapter title, Health and Wholeness, Trauma, Anxiety, and Our Call to Mental Health. Whew, that's a topic. It's
a lot, yeah.
It's a lot. So we're going to dive in on it here just shortly, but I would love for our listeners to get a sense of who you are and a little bit of like how you got connected with Riverside and this project specifically. So I'll kick it to you and just feel free to, anything in the biography part you want to dive in, we welcome it.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Sarah Iverson. I'm a physician assistant at an OBGYN clinic near Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I live. I also have experience working in family practice, and so a lot of experience working in mental health care in those two roles. Whether it's supporting, women, their mental wellness throughout various transitions of life, but also managing a lot of depression, anxiety, premenstrual disorder on a weekly basis. My husband and I also have a wiggly 9-month-old boy that keeps us busy and happy. I am also on the board of directors for Global Health Ministries, which is a nonprofit based here in Minneapolis that partners with health systems, faith-based health systems around the world, mostly in the global south. And the organization redistributes surplus medical supplies abroad, also does some consulting with those partner health organizations and supports grassroots primary care efforts. And I am also a member at a local ELCA Lutheran congregation here in Edina, where I live. I got connected with the Riverside Innovation Hub.
Real fast, can I pause? Yeah. I love that you said that you're on a board of Global Health Ministries. One, because I love that the board is willing to bring on a young adult. I think that's so important, right? And two, I would just love, this is total, I told you there might be rabbit holes. Will you just share like how being on a board of something like that has influenced both your vocation, but also like your view of ministry, like kind of beyond the walls of the church?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have thought a lot about, there's been times in my life where I thought about going to seminary. And so being involved in ministry has been really important to me. I took as many religion classes as I could in college between my science lab courses and whatnot. And have always felt called in that direction somewhat, but that call, to be a healthcare provider is always stronger. So I went with that. And I've continued to be surprised the ways that those two things have kind of come together in my life. Like I thought I kind of had to choose either or. But after college, I got called to be a missionary in Rwanda working in a science lab. And then I got invited to be on the board of directors where I got to use some of my medical background in ministry in this way. And I think I've learned a lot just by being on a board, by how organizations run and strategic planning. And learning a lot from the other board members who have spent years doing global health around the world. And it's been a great experience and a real honor to be part of this and the work that they're doing.
I love that the idea that ministry and like health, so I'm United Methodist, right? And so John Wesley, toward the end of his career, started writing like health books, like medicine books, which I haven't read a ton of them. I read some excerpts from some of them in seminary, but I was like, oh, you should have stayed in your lane. But the reason he wanted to go down that path was because he saw the connection, right? Like he saw that, as a clergy person, so focused on the spiritual health of people, but he realized that there's a very much a physiological aspect to it too. And again, back to your title, right? Health and wholeness, like it's two sides of the same coin, right? Like we often, sometimes our binary minds love to put these two things in separate spaces, but it's very much the same space. So I love that. I'm just a big fan and props to you for doing that work. So I interrupted you. Okay. Back on track here. How did you get connected with the book and Riverside and that stuff?
So Riverside Innovation Hub is based out of Augsburg University here in Minneapolis. And Riverside Innovation Hub was started by a grant from the Lilly Endowment to kind of start conversation and spark curiosity around the intersection of the church, young adults, and the public square, the neighborhood. And I heard about this kind of through some connections on Facebook. One of the women involved in the program was actually in my book club that I was in, and then another one did the same volunteer program that I did after college. And so I kind of had connections with both of them that way, and saw the link, the invite to invite these young adults to this initial envisioning weekend. And so this weekend took place in fall of 2022, I believe. And they invited 50 or 60 young adults from around the church, from around the country, ecumenically. So there was Lutherans, Catholics, Presbyterians, Methodists, Evangelicals. And it's just a weekend to talk about the church. We started talking about our gratitudes for the church. In fact, that was very intentional. The first night, they were just like, we're just going to talk about what we love about the church, so we don't start out like just hating on the church. And so we talked about how the church has formed us in positive ways, our gratitude for the church, what we hope that the church continues to carry forward. But then we also transitioned to what we're frustrated about the church, what we are grieving, that maybe don't have space to grieve that in the church, or how the church has hurt us or hurt our friends or our neighbors. And even though there's a lot of those big, heavy topics, I did walk away very rejuvenated that like all these young adults, they really care about the church. And that was really refreshing to me that these people cared about the church and cared about the survival of the church as much as I did, while also acknowledging how much it needs to change.
Do you remember some of the things that were really lifted up as things of gratitude? Any themes?
I think community was a big part of it. That's been a hugely important role in my own life. I was talking to my husband about this the other day as I was kind of mentally preparing for this conversation. And, I think there's a lot of people out there, young adults or of any age, that say like, I'm spiritual, but not religious.
Right.
And I just feel like that would never work for me. Like my spirituality, that individual piece of my faith, like my faith isn't strong enough to survive on its own.
Wow.
Like I need that communal, that the traditions and shared rituals of religion, of the church. Because as much as I wish I had this like super strong prayer life, or that I, made time to do devotions on a regular basis, I don't. There's been times in my life where it's been stronger, but it's not the strongest at the moment. I'm busy. I'm tired. I'm a new parent.
Right. God bless you.
And so I appreciate that no matter how the week went, I gather with this group of people on Sunday morning, and we do hear the Bible. We do pray together. We do take time to pause. And that centering, but also that community, those people that recognize when we haven't been there, that, say, oh, we've missed you. Like, how are you guys doing? And checking in is so important, I think, for myself, for our family, for that, healthy rhythms of the week. That's why I care so strongly about the church.
Yeah.
And I think many people feel similarly, whether they're part of like a formal, like Sunday morning worshiping community or some other form of community, that we all recognize how much we all need each other.
That's beautiful. I love that. This chapter specifically, I'm sure. So you're sitting in this weekend, like again, all these gratitude things, a lot of the things, it reminds me. Did you ever watch the show Newsroom? This may be dating me, and this may have been before you. Dadgummit, I'm old. Okay. In the opening scene of Newsroom, there's this whole thing about like this question for this panel of people, and it's about like, why is America the greatest country in the world? Da, da, da. And then Jeff Daniels is like, it's not, but it could be, and like has this whole sense of like, I've always thought about that in terms of the church too, like it's not just about like being, we're going to just stomp all over this or try to burn it all down kind of thing. It's really about, no, we see better ways here, and as things continue to emerge, like we want to be a part of the healing and wholeness process, right? Like we want health for the institution and for the soul of the institution, as well as the individuals who are part of that institution. And I hate to call it church institution, but like, it is, right? It is.
Yeah.
So what was the process of you being at this weekend and then getting partnered with another author, a co-author to like write this chapter? And how did you all settle on what the chapter would be about?
So from this weekend of conversation with the 60 other young adults, kind of 11 different topics emerged from those conversations.
Okay.
And then those 11 topics became the 11 chapters for this book. And then they invited us as young adults to apply to co-author one of these chapters. And then I was selected to write the chapter on mental health in the church. And then, so each chapter is written by a young adult. And then we were paired with what they're calling a thought scholar. So someone with a little more experience in the field. And I was paired with Gia Johnson. She is a somatic coach and entrepreneur. She founded the Freedom Dream Collective. At the time of writing this, she was running a higher ed and prison program through a seminary in the Cook County jails out of Chicago, and drew on some of those experiences in writing the book.
Jeez, that's a lot.
Yeah, it is, and it was a big topic that we were given.
Yeah, that is big. That's a big one. First of all, just that's a. How is it to just sit and try to like? I'm like trying to think of how it would be to write a chapter with another person. So you really kind of started. Did you kind of do the outline first, basically, and kind of like come up with your own thoughts on it, or did you all come together from the very beginning and just say?
Nope, we all came together. So we all gathered for a writing retreat. So all 22 of us authors in spring of 23 would have been by that point. And you're given this topic. It was just mental health in the church. And granted, I had a little bit of that insight of being a part of those. Not all of the authors were part of that initial envisioning weekend, but I was able to be part of that. Okay. And so I was able to hear some of those, kind of what some of those people were speaking to about some of the conversation that we need to be having about mental health.
Yeah.
But that weekend, I remember we just went on a lot of walks and just kind of started talking, and we hadn't met each other either. So we were just getting to know each other.
Oh,
wow. And I think that, we could have written a whole book on mental health in the church, right? And I think had they picked someone else to write this chapter, it would have been a very different chapter. Sure. And so I was really kind of trying to think about like, well, what's the story that we are called to tell, like individually? Because we're not going to cover every topic of mental health in the church. And there's a lot of ways we could go with this. But what's kind of that message that's on our hearts that we feel we need to amplify in this chapter? And so I had kind of been thinking about anxiety. That's what I had written kind of in the application for this. I have struggled with anxiety in the past, and still do from time to time. Sure. If you look at my medical chart, it probably says I'm diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, which is why I'm on a medication. That has never felt like a very accurate representation of my experience, because I don't feel like I'm someone that like cognitively is like worrying about anything and everything. But for me, the experience of anxiety is a very physical experience. It manifests as like tightness in my jaw or my shoulders, or like kind of a heaviness in my chest, or like a shallowness to my breath. So subtle that it took me a long time to like admit and recognize that I was struggling with anxiety.
Wow.
Even though I diagnose and treat anxiety on a very regular basis.
Yeah.
And so I think in part in denial about it too. And I couldn't figure out what I was worrying about or what I was anxious about. It's just like my body was just this really unpleasant place to be. And so after kind of being in denial about it for a while, I finally did, make an appointment with a therapist and a psychiatrist, and was able to learn more about kind of what my brain was doing that was causing some of these feelings in my body. But as someone who's both a healthcare provider and cares about the church, I started kind of thinking about like, well, what does anxiety feel like in the church body, right? Like uncontrolled anxiety in the church body similarly makes the church an unpleasant place to be sometimes. And that can inhibit how we're able to do God's ministry, right? And so in the book, I kind of make these parallels and kind of use the physiology of the human body on chronic anxiety and compare that to the physiology of the church body suffering from chronic anxiety, and how that stifles our ability to like, when we're anxious, our vessels like vasoconstrict, and so we can't, like, blood doesn't flow freely. And similarly, like when a church is anxious, they hold more tightly to their resources, and they don't give things as freely. Or, when our bodies are anxious under chronic stress, like inflammation rises, our immune system is suppressed. And so, what might have been like a little cut in our skin more easily gets infected, right? And becomes, that infection can spread. Whereas like if we have a healthy immune system, we just heal that. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And same way with the church, like if that, quote unquote immune system of the church is not functioning correctly, then like those little pockets of anxiety or fear or, hurt, those can kind of slowly become systemic instead of getting addressed in a healthy, timely manner.
Oh my gosh. I feel like you should go on tour and be giving this talk to churches all over the country. Because I really appreciate the acknowledgement. I mean, we were just kind of talking about a second ago too, right? Like this recognition that there's what happens on the individual level very much shows up on the institutional level as well. So we don't always think about it that way, but kind of this like ecosystem mentality that gets portrayed out. And something so small, right? Like actually ecosystems are quite delicate, something so small can make a huge impact on the whole.
Right. And like from a medical perspective, like we're just beginning to understand the complexities of like that brain, that mind body connection in really fascinating ways. And I think we're going to continue to learn a lot more here in the next decades, but there's a lot of conversation going on right now about mental illness, right? And trying to break that stigma. But I still think there's not a whole lot of awareness about the subtle ways it's affecting us all.
Yeah.
And, I work with patients and see the very physical ways that anxiety and mental health can affect the way their body's functioning. I had a patient once, she and her partner had decided to make this big jump, this big transition in their life, this big financial undertaking, and started to kind of have this low grade panic attack as she's signing these papers for this big leap that they were going to do, and started breathing really shallowly, started hyperventilating for like a week, and came into my office with like her hands and feet were numb because she had been hyperventilating for a week.
Oh my gosh.
So this emotional trigger was enough that it like changed her breathing. So it changed her blood chemistry to change, that you couldn't feel her hands and feet anymore. And in that case, we were able to start her on kind of like a rapid acting anxiety medication, kind of break that cycle. And she only been on medication for like a week, and then was able to kind of move on with her life in a more resilient way. But I see it at other times too, where it's not as obvious that what that emotional trigger is or that mental health trigger is. Excuse me. I had a patient kind of in the height of the COVID stay-at-home orders. She came in to see me, and she's like, I feel short of breath. I don't know what's going on. I'm worried about this, but I can't take a deep breath. I feel short of breath all the time. And I said, checked in, like, how's your mental health? Like, do you feel anxious? Like, there's a lot going on right now. And she's like, no, like, I mean, obviously it's a lot. There's a global pandemic going on. Kids are being homeschooled. We're all home together. It's a lot, but, I think we're doing okay. I think I even had her do like an anxiety depression screening questionnaire. Looked fine. Like, well, maybe that cold you had a few months ago was long COVID. Looked into that. Like, sent her to a pulmonologist, cardiologist, nothing. Like, we did a lot of tests on her, and finally, we're like, I don't know what else to do. And she came back a couple of weeks later for a follow-up, and she said, you know what, a couple of weeks ago, I decided I just kind of needed some space. So she got herself a hotel room for a couple nights and just like gave herself a little me time, a little self-care. And she's like, my breathing was fine. And so we started, so I'm like, okay, well, it sounds like it is your body, telling you that there's some anxiety going on. And so we started her on a anxiety medication, and she was able to breathe again. But we went a long time, and like both of us talked, multiple times, like, is this anxiety? And no, I don't think it is. So we went into all these other avenues, but, and which I just think shows us the power of like, you can't always just talk yourself out of it too. That we really have to pay attention to like what's going on with the body, with that kind of like that ecosystem that you described.
Yeah. I love, so you've brought up medication multiple times, which I love. And I think is a good reminder that there are sometimes that's the only, maybe not the only, that's the best, or maybe it is the only, I don't know. I'm not a medical professional, Make it noted on the podcast. Phil is not a medical professional. I'm not pulling a John Wesley here. But in the same way that, like, for so long, again, being from small town Missouri, like, people didn't talk about mental health, right? And like, there was a stigma around it. And then if you were on medication for it, you definitely didn't talk about that kind of thing, right? So I'm glad that stigma, it feels like, is transitioning away, right? So I would love to hear a little bit though about the idea of medication versus, again, she went to a hotel room, right? Like, she just created some space for herself, as you said, that was another way to handle. Like, there's a holistic approach that comes to dealing with things like anxiety and various mental health issues. Will you share a little bit about that? And then the follow-up's going to be, what does that look like for the church then, right? Like, what's the medication for the church? But so let's focus on the individual first, and then we'll expand it out.
Yeah. So first of all, there is still a lot of stigma around medication.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I definitely, especially young adults, actually,
really?
who, well, their parents have stigma. And so, that young adult is struggling with anxiety, depression, something, and they just, they've been struggling with this for a while, and they finally, I'm talking to them like, I do think medication would be helpful for me, but, my parents don't believe in medication, or my mom doesn't think I should be on medication. And so they're like, I'm just going to kind of get by until I move out of their house or until I'm off their insurance. Which, is really sad to me that, like, I mean, what parent wouldn't want their child to thrive?
Right.
And there's this, safe medication that might help them thrive. So, but we send, therapy is great. I think everybody should see a therapist at some point. Do you think they might at all benefit from that? Like, do it.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have mental illness, it's like so helpful in going through transitions, or, when there's just a lot going on in life. For me, exercise has always been really important to my mental health. And I think it is for a lot of people. Exercise changes our neurochemistry, and kind of helps combat some of those. It's kind of a release, really, right? Like, on that primal level, when we kind of get anxious, it's because, like, our body's in that fight or flight mode. So going for a run where you're kind of like, let your body be in flight for a moment, then kind of helps us complete that stress cycle.
And it doesn't have to be a marathon, right? Like, you don't have to be like I'm like gonna tackle this by starting to train for a marathon. It can literally just be like just go for a quick run kind of thing, or a brisk walk, right? Like, even if you're not a runner.
Right. Yeah. I read once that, like, going for a walk is one of the quickest ways to help lessen anxiety.
Wow. Noted. Right. Taking notes.
Right. And I do think there's a benefit of trying to make that walk outside too. I think there's benefit to, spending time outside, getting that sunlight. We're going to start having some pretty dark evenings here in Minnesota. So getting that sunlight's important. Diet affects our mental well-being. We're just starting to learn more about that and the gut microbiome and that impact on mental health. Being in community with others. There's a, epidemic of loneliness and anxiety, I think largely thanks to social media and phones and whatnot, that we can all kind of be so connected, but still very lonely.
There's a book I'm looking at, Alone Together, by, I think it's Sherry Turkle. That's exactly what she is all about. We're so connected and yet very disconnected.
Right. Yeah. Meditation has been shown to be very helpful. We know that on the scientific level, even though people have been meditating and knowing the wisdom of that practice for centuries, we are now beginning to understand how that actually a regular meditation practice can cause, like, structural changes in our brain.
So there's, like, some scientific backing behind that now.
Yeah.
Are there other, like, spiritual practices or things that you've seen people engage in, or you yourself have engaged in, that have kind of been a balm, if you will, to mental health?
I've found journaling helpful at times, or like a gratitude journal. Just kind of writing those things down. I can't remember where I heard this, but someone was talking about the benefits of a gratitude journal, and they're saying that when they go see their therapist, they're kind of throughout the week collecting these things of, like, here's this, like, this neurotic thing about me that I need to talk to my therapist, and trying to, like, remember those things. And they started a gratitude journal, and they were starting to remember, like, oh, what are the things I'm going to write in my gratitude journal?
Oh, wow.
and the mind shift that came with.
Yeah, it just like puts a meaning making, a lens of meaning making on, I love that.
Yeah.
I was just telling a friend the other day that like, I felt like I could never just read books until I had this, like, if I knew what the question was going to be that I needed to respond to write a paper or something about, then I was like, oh, I'm reading to respond to that. But it's the same thing, right? So much happens to us in the world. We perceive so many things when we put a lens on for ourselves of like, oh, but what other gratitude pieces of this, It just gives you an opportunity to really hone in on that, and rather than just being bombarded with all that information all the time.
Which I feel like I need to add that also the caveat of like, some of those spiritual practices, the journaling, meditation, showing up to be in community with others, gratitude, like those can be helpful, but also like mental illness is illness, right? And so if somebody's struggling with depression or anxiety, it's not like, hey, maybe get a gratitude journal.
Yeah, that's a really good word.
Like their brain is malfunctioning. They need medical help, or often need medical help. And so I think it's really important that even though our spirituality and religion can help, I think, support our mental health and our mental well-being, we don't want to over-spiritualize it.
Yeah. Again, recognizing that it's a holistic approach, right? Like there's, it's probably often is going to be a both and rather than just one or the other kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. So the other piece, it says trauma, right? Is part of the title as well. Was there a lot on, we got to come back to maybe we'll pull the trauma piece into the church part too. I don't want to get away from that too, right? But like, so what was the trauma aspect of the chapter in the writing?
So my co-author, Gia, she kind of really headed up that section, and drawing on both some personal and professional experiences on how trauma affects our mental health and our mental well-being and can lead to mental illness, specifically speaking to how in our country, we criminalize a lot of mental illness instead of getting people the help they need for that mental illness.
Because that makes sense, right?
Right. And I think that there's in our country, right, like as we're becoming so polarized and all these, like all the phobias out there, right? The xenophobia, the homophobia, the racism, like I think a lot of that stems from trauma, anxiety, fear, pain. Like I think very few people like want to like hurt people just to hurt people, right? Like I think it's often coming from their own hurt somewhere. And so I think to move past some of these big things, we have to like tend to the mental health of all of us so that we can kind of stop these patterns that we're in right now. Gia, actually, I'm going to quote her here. She says, "I'm convinced sin is less about moral failures and more about unresolved trauma that results in harm to self, harm to others, harm to the community, and harm to the earth and other than earth kin."
Wow. Man. Wait, did she say other than earth kin?
Sorry, other than human kin.
There we go. I was like, she brought aliens in this too, which I'm not opposed to. Look, I think the gospel's cosmic, so I'm not opposed to that. But there we go. Other than human kin.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah. I like it either way. I'm taking either one of those quotes, but that's a great quote. And again, we don't even talk about sin all that much anymore. Like in mainline congregations, like it's just not a word we bring up a whole lot.
Yeah.
And like that's a really good recognition that like these words do still have meaning. And sometimes it's helpful to do some clarifying on what we mean when we say these words, because a lot of us bring our own like spiritual trauma from how those words have been used against us and weaponized against us, and so we don't have to throw baby out with the bathwater when it comes to that, but recognize that there is something there still that's worthy of our time and attention, and that we probably do need some healing from.
Right. I mean, even just kind of like on a more day-to-day level, like when I see a patient that's has been rude to my medical receptionist or my nurse, like then I go in and see them and find out that they had another negative pregnancy test after months of infertility, or they're going through a divorce, or they're in pain, or they just found out they miscarried. And so that pain is what causes people to act out, or that trauma, or that worry.
Gosh. Okay, now let's take it to the next level, right? Individual, like what does this look like at the institutional ecosystem level?
Yeah. So we talk a little bit about that in our book, talking about, like I mentioned, the meditation.
Right.
We can do that in community.
Mm-hmm.
You and I, before we started this podcast, we took some deep breaths together.
We
That
did.
was very grounding for my nervous system.
Same.
Yeah. And, what if we did that before, our church council meeting or
Right.
worship or youth group? And, so if we all just showed up kind of with these more regulated nervous systems. I also kind of talk about, I mentioned therapy. So cognitive behavioral therapy is looking at that connection between what we think, feel, and do, and how, making changes in one of those areas can help change another one of those areas. Because sometimes we can't just like tell ourselves to feel differently. We have to either change what we're doing or change what we're thinking to kind of change how we're feeling sometimes. And so in our chapter, I kind of talk about like, what if we use some of those same concepts for the church, right? Like if we're kind of grieving, or if this just is like, it doesn't feel like a joyful, resilient place to be, what are the stories we're telling ourselves?
Yeah.
That are causing those feelings, or what could we be doing differently? Like if we want to be a resilient church, what does a resilient church do? So let's take those actions to do that, even if we don't feel that way yet. Kind of this aspect of like fake it until you make it.
Right.
And then that connection of that feeling or the thinking will follow those actions, or vice versa in other directions.
I'm putting you on the spot here and whatever. I don't know what you didn't say the church you go to. So have you seen this play out at a church level, like at an actual organizational level?
Yeah. So I go to Edina Community Lutheran Church.
There you go. You're calling them out right now. There
yep,
it is.
Calling them out. And actually 2 of us authors go to this church, which is
cool.
kind of a small world.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about that this week. So this past Sunday was kind of the start of the programming year. I'm sure it was for many churches. Growing up, they would call it like Rally Sunday.
Yeah.
Started the programming, like getting people to sign up for different committees, sign up for youth groups, sign up for whatnot. Our church this Sunday called it Renewal Sunday. And the church newsletter like started out saying like, hey, there's a lot going on in the world. You're not called to do it all.
Yeah.
My church is full of, it's a very social justice oriented, very mission driven group of people that care very deeply about a lot of stuff. And so when there's so much hard stuff going on in the world and you care so much, like that's exhausting.
Yep.
Right? That weighs heavy on us. And in our current world, we can hear about all the awful stuff that's going on around the whole world 24/7. And our pastor, even during his sermon, talked about like, we're all called to carry a cross, but it's not Jesus's cross. We're not called to be Jesus. We're not called to do everything. We all have our own calling. And so kind of listening to that. And I think that reminder is really helpful because, I'm that same way. I care a lot about a lot of different stuff, but at the same time, I don't feel like I have a lot of energy right now. I got a lot on my plate. And
you do.
And so that reminder of like, we're not called to do everything, and listening carefully to what are we called to do? What do I have the capacity to do right now? Because I can't do everything. I won't do it well. I need to do what think about my gifts and my time and talents. And then in fact, in July, our church did Rest is Resistance. It's a book by Trisha Hersey.
Yeah.
And so I actually have not read the book yet. But many people did. And like the month of July, they're like, nope, we're not having any meetings. Nothing going on in July.
Wow. That's a disruption of the pattern, right?
Yeah. And so they had invited people like just on a, Thursday evening, if they just want to come out and hang out on the patio of our church, they could. But other than that, nothing was going on.
Wow.
And so I think stuff like that of, if you're feeling a certain way based off of like our current political climate or whatever climate, other people probably are too. So like, how can we tend to our own mental health care together?
Yeah. That's a corporate version of going to get a hotel room for 2 nights, right? Like, we're not going to do
Yeah.
any meetings this whole month.
Right.
We'll come together and just hang out and like just be in each other's presence. Again, community is still that healing
Right.
portion, but
Right.
no big agenda other than just being present
Hmm.
to one another. Ah,
Right.
what a beautiful example.
Yeah. Yeah. There's
That's,
one Sunday morning in July. I remember our son was sick and we were up all night and we're like, should we go to church? And we're like, rest is resistance. We're going to stay home.
good for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's great.
Hmm.
Okay. So I'm already feeling more hopeful, but so that's helpful. Thank you for this. But when you think about not just your chapter, I mean, hone in on your chapter too, but for the book as a whole, and how this is going to play out in the world for churches and for young adults, what are your hopes, both for the church and for young adults in the midst of? I know it's just a book, right? It's more than a book, but
Yeah.
it's just a book, so I know
Yeah.
it's only going to do so much. But like, what really is your hope with this chapter specifically, but then also the book as a whole?
Well, I see this book as just kind of a collection of conversation starters, right? Like every chapter is such a big topic,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's one on climate change, creation, destruction. There's one on, curiosity in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, mental health is such a big topic. You heard
Yeah.
Jared talk about the tokenism of young adults.
Mm-hmm.
There's one on grief and lament. All of these could be a book in and of itself.
Yeah.
And all of these could be taken, like I said, very different directions and depending on who wrote it.
Yeah.
And so I think each is just kind of supposed to meant to be a discussion starter.
Mm.
Because Riverside Innovation Hub, they kind of started working with these cohort of congregations of like that were helping them kind of revitalize their congregations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think many of those congregations were coming from a place of like, how can we get more young adults in our pews? Church attendance is declining, seminary enrollment is declining. And kind of shifted that question of like, well, that's not the right question to be asking, right? That's not the goal of the church is to attendance numbers. The goal of the church is to be God's hands and feet out in our neighborhoods. And there's a lot of faithful young adults who may or may not be part of a congregation, but are living out their faith in the public square. So let's follow these young adults out there into these spaces and hear what they have learned, what they're saying, what their hopes for the church are. And I think that each of these different topics show kind of the needs of the world. And if we're not responding to that, then the church is going to kind of, die out and no longer be necessary if it's not responding to the current needs of our communities. And so whether it's, responding to like, what does it look like to be a church that's living through a climate crisis, right? We can't keep living like we did 50 years ago or 100 years ago because that's not what the world needs. Same thing with mental health. Like we're in a, some people say like we're in unprecedented times, which I agree that we are, but I also think everything
feels unprecedented.
So
at this point,
right, so being unprecedented is not unprecedented, but we do have unique needs of this time that if we're not responding to that, then we're not going to be relevant and we're not going to be necessary. And so, God is calling us to the here and now. And so we need to be having these new hard conversations and thinking critically about how we're showing up in the midst of all this.
In your church, you feel like your church is doing that on Sunday mornings, beyond Sunday mornings, in a combination of both those ways?
What do you mean doing what?
That's a loaded question. So I hear you saying like these are conversation starters, and like these conversations we hope take place within the church, right? And they're going to take place beyond the church too, like they already are in a lot of ways. But a church that's going to really grasp this book or the concept of this book, like I'm curious how they do that, right? Because the way I typically experience church on a Sunday morning, there's not a lot of space for this conversation, like
right.
Most of it's not fully passive, right? But it's not conversation driven typically,
Yeah.
So where are you? Maybe the better question is put this way: how are you seeing churches, or is your church like embracing dialogical conversations around these kind of things?
Yeah. So I don't think. First of all, like this book is not a destination, right? There's not like you're doing it or you're not, right? It's a process, and so even in my own congregation, I see us doing a lot of those things. Like there's a climate justice team. There's they do anti-racism vigils. They there's a court watch group that is there to support people in the justice system. So they're doing a lot of these things where there is space to have these conversations and getting them outside the walls of the church. But we can always do it better, right? Like we're still all entrenched in these institutions, whether it's the church or the justice system or whatever, that we can't stop having these conversations. So even the churches that are doing some of those steps, like we have to keep paying attention to like, the needs of the world are ever changing, and how can we keep being better at this?
Yeah, I should apologize. That was a very loaded question, just based on some of my own experiences in church of like wanting to be able to have those conversations more openly and not always finding a place to do it, And so I know that it is happening. I know churches are doing it, and so that's why I'm just curious of like what your experiences of that, and I know it is more than just sitting down around a table and having a conversation, right? Like having an anti-racism vigil is a deep conversation, probably with fewer words, that still is very impactful,
And also, like when I think about the church, we talk about, when you say the book is titled, young adults, letters from the young adults to the church, we're not talking about like my congregation or your congregation, right? We're talking about
universal.
The church body, right? And so those conversations can also be like when we sit around, like when I go back to my parents' house and I sit around the table of like myself, my sister who's a seminarian, my dad's who's like a former church pastor, and like, or not pastor, sorry, president.
There you go. Okay.
My sister's trying to be a pastor. But my family that's all involved in different congregations, different faith communities in different ways, and we're having conversations about this. Like it doesn't all have to be on like church's time.
Yeah. I think, I guess part of my, back to the spiritual but not religious aspect, I think it's a pendulum swing, right? And I think a lot of young adults moved that way because they saw a generation of people who they felt like were religious but not spiritual, And so, again, you just did church as an activity kind of thing as opposed to, and I know that's a generalization, not always fair, but I do think that's why that spiritual but not religious pendulum swung like the way it did, was just that was their experience of so much of it. So
100%, I agree.
But yeah, I fully agree that like so much of this happens beyond the walls of the church, and that's where the church really flourishes often, right? We come back together in the walls of the church, which is so important too, but so many of these things happen beyond the walls of the church. Whew. Okay, you ready for this question?
I think so.
Where are you finding beauty lately? Where do you see beauty in the world around you?
I'd have to say in my son. Like I said, I have a almost 9-month-old little boy, and he is just the happiest little kid. And it's such a fun age that he is right now, just seeing his sense of self and personality just light up, and just the joy that he gets in, stopping to watch the lawnmower outside, or, last night at bath time, he discovered he could like splash with his feet too, and not just his hands. And just, it's just been a really good reminder of me to slow down and pay attention to all the beauty all around us.
I love that. Look what my feet can do. It's so good. It's so good. Sarah, this is so awesome. If you could give any advice or any, I know that's strong to do, and again, back to Baird and tokenizing, right? But like, if you had a message for young adults, given everything we've talked about, just kind of in general, what would your message be to young adults?
You're not alone. Right? Like whatever it is, whether it's, if you're struggling with mental health, you're not alone. Whether it's, caring about the church and feeling like there aren't other young people around you that feel the same way, you're not alone. And if you feel alone, I encourage you to reach out to places where, find that community or find that support to help you flourish.
That's good. Okay, you mentioned it was a Edina Community Lutheran Church, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so people, if they're looking for a church in the Minneapolis area, right, they can go find that one. If a young adult or anybody is listening to this and they're like, I really want Sarah to be my physician, like, are you open? Can they come find you? Is that possible?
Yes, if you look for Sarah Iverson, PAC, you'll be able to find me.
There we go.
Yeah.
If you're looking for it, there it is. That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
I really appreciate your just willingness to dive into this. And I think even beforehand, I talked a little bit about like the balancing of like vocation and faith and all that stuff, and we didn't really fully dive into that. But I think you did in some ways too. That like this is a ministry, right? Like what you do is clearly a ministry, and it's so visible just from what you've shared with us today. Like your heart is on full display in the words you've shared. So thank you for what you shared with us today.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation.
All right, folks, go check out the book. We'll link it in the show notes, but Hungry for Hope. Find Sarah's chapter in there, Health and Wholeness, Trauma, Anxiety, and Our Call to Mental Health. Go in peace, my friends. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Collective Voice, the premier podcast of the 787 Collective. For more information, visit us at 787collective.org or find us on social media. And if you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate us, and share a review. For when you do, you are tricking the algorithm for the common good.